6,000 languages spoken on Earth. Fully half are being taught to children, which means that effectively, unless something changes, they're dead. What this means is that within a single generation, we may be losing fully half of humanity's intellectual, social, and spiritual legacy. This does not have to happen. These cultures are not failed attempts at being modern. They're unique answers to a fundamental question. What does it mean to be human and alive? I've come to Polynesia to learn about the oceans and the largest culture sphere in human history. The story of the Wayfinders of Polynesia. A few years ago, I might have been writing its last chapter, but now there is a new beginning and the light at the edge of the world. All human cultures, by definition, share the same intellectual capacity, the same broad genius. If you could take all the brilliance that has allowed us to put a man on the moon and apply it to an understanding of the ocean, what you would get would be Polynesia. Here, the ancient skill of navigation, called wayfinding, linked people on thousands of islands spread over 25 million square kilometers, nearly a quarter of the surface of the planet. It's an amazing story, and it would have been lost if a small group of Hawaiians hadn't reached back through the years to save it. The modern Wayfinders are led by Nainoa Thompson. His roots go back to an older Hawaii, when it was still a Polynesian kingdom, a kingdom that fell to the invasion of the outside world. Nainoa's ancestors were torn from their past and left to fend for themselves in a new and uncertain future.
When I grew up, my oldest memories would really be my grandparents, who my father's mother, pure Hawaiian, spoke native language. She danced hula beautifully as a child. When she went to school, Hawaiian language and hula was outlawed. She was beaten by her teacher with sticks for doing that. I mean, this physically beating out of her, and then she made the choices she made. Didn't transfer who she was to my father. My father grew up without his culture.
Nainoa's generation too was lost between worlds, but he found a way forward aboard a ship. A replica of the great sailing canoes of old. It's called Hokulea, after the sacred star of Hawaii.
It'll reflect the sky, all this white up here. But when the wind blows over it, it's like it cracks the mirror, and it makes all this shadow in here. So the darker the ocean is, the more wind. So you want to look this side equally to this side and start to compare.
It was on board the Hokulea that the ancient techniques of wayfinding came back to inspire the imaginations of the modern Polynesians, like whispers coming forward in time. The Hokulea taught them to pay attention to weather, to read the waves, to understand the meaning of stars. They learned lessons of the big water, how to anticipate distant islands by the colors in the clouds, and find landfall by following the flights of feeding birds. And they came to recognize finer details, like clocking their speed by watching the wash along the length of the hull. Since 1976, the Hokulea has sailed to every major island group in Polynesia: Tahiti, New Zealand, Easter Island. The canoe has become a symbol of renewal, and there is a strong feeling among Hawaiians that if the Hokulea does not sail, the resurrected culture of the Wayfinders may not survive.
The wind that we're experiencing is coming around the mountain here, but the true wind, like you're saying, is
And so Nainoa sails and enlists a new generation of navigators. He's become an immensely important cultural figure, publicly more admired than anyone else in Hawaii. And his vessel is a vision of ancestral genius, an image of what it was like when the Polynesians ruled the Pacific.
Physically, she's a double-hull voyaging canoe. That's a Polynesian design that really is the front runner of the modern catamaran. She's 62 feet long. Her beam is about 20 feet. And fully loaded on a deep sea voyage, she weighs about 24,000 pounds, so she's heavy. Everything on the canoe is lashed. There's probably over 5 miles of rope.
Before the Hokulea sailed, few acknowledged that Polynesians deliberately navigated the Pacific. It seemed to be impossible. How, in vessels built with stone tools, could people have sailed weeks against the currents and prevailing winds with no compasses, sextants, or charts? But they clearly had done so. Evidence of a common Polynesian civilization was everywhere, on hundreds of islands, in ruins and middens, tikis, and rock carvings. Scholars began to investigate, like my friend, Edmundo Edwards. Edmundo has lived on Easter Island for 45 years and has identified no fewer than 20,000 archaeological sites there.
We don't really know exactly how this expanded in the past.
Edmundo has traveled throughout Polynesia as both an archaeologist and an explorer. You know, the incredible thing, Edmundo, is just the scale of the culture sphere that was Polynesia. I mean, from Auckland to Honolulu is the equivalent of Cape Town to Cairo, twice the width of the United States.
Yeah, when I left for French Polynesia in 1985, they asked me if I could start working in the archaeological survey of French Polynesia. There is this area, you see right here, it's 1,000 by 1,000 miles, it's 1 million square miles. And I really didn't know where to start, but apparently from Samoa Tonga, at least at some time in the past.
Evidence suggests that early Polynesians made it from somewhere in Southeast Asia to Samoa and Tonga, then sailed eastward, spreading through the Marquesas Islands before going north toward Hawaii and south to Easter Island. 80 generations is all it took them to spread over 10 million square miles of the Pacific Ocean, one of the greatest achievements in the history of humanity. Now, that they did that has never been denied, but how they did it is one of those great examples of how history is a swindle of the schoolmasters. For generations, academics maintained that this diffusion was somehow accidental, as if these Polynesians were just sort of these dumb fishermen who went out fishing and got blown off course and stumbled upon a new land, as if they were fishing for tuna and they ended up capturing islands. In truth, at a time when Europeans were clinging to coastlines, the ancestors of the Polynesians were sailing the open expanses of the biggest ocean on Earth. In the late 18th century, Captain James Cook reported that Polynesian canoes could travel 3 leagues for every 2 that he could sail in his flagship. He met a navigator who could lay out pebbles in the sand, marking accurately every major island group over a span of 4,200 kilometers. Cook noted that people from the Marquesas could understand the language of the Tahitians, even though they were separated by 1,500 kilometers of ocean. Today, the magnitude of the Polynesian achievement is undeniable. But as recently as 1947, a maverick explorer named Thor Heyerdahl captivated the world with his idea that all of Polynesia had been settled from South America. For the damaged and dwindling Polynesian culture, Heyerdahl's celebrated voyage in the Kon-Tiki was yet another wound, suggesting that their ancestors never had the knowledge or wherewithal to settle the Pacific. There's no evidence to suggest the primary settlement of Polynesia originated in South America.
No, none whatsoever. There's never an artifact from South America has ever been found in the Pacific. It would be normal if anybody traveled from South America that you would bring pottery or other things into the Pacific. Or DNA. And there's nothing of this, nothing. Look, we don't even know for sure if they had a sail.
The Polynesians had sails, and they were the ones who voyaged, sometimes achieving the impossible, reaching Easter Island, for example, one of the most isolated points on Earth, 1,500 years ago. But why did they sail? Why does anyone sail? For wealth, out of curiosity, a spirit of adventure? Polynesia had a rigid class structure, and the only way for social advancement was to discover a new world.
We all love exploring, we all love discovering new worlds. So I'm sure that this necessity that we have to go and find things, to go beyond everything that we know, existed. So they made these expeditions, they went out, they discovered new lands, but they knew how to come back.
The one thing Polynesians were not prepared for was the arrival of Europeans. Their civilization was built on two institutional pillars: the chief, whose authority was derived from his ability to control and distribute surplus food, and the priest, whose power was based on his ability to manipulate the spirit realm and to punish those who violated tapu, the sacred rules of society, from where we get the word taboo. Within a generation of contact, diseases on island after island had destroyed 90% of the population. The collapse of agriculture eliminated the power of the chief. Then came missionaries, who were immune to disease and who violated tapu with impunity, thus undermining the priests. Within a generation, Polynesian civilization imploded. Before Nainoa Thompson's Hokulea crew sails at sunset, they gather for a prayer. The comfort they draw from each other calms a simmering resentment. Just over 100 years ago, Hawaii was a kingdom. But today, many native Hawaiians feel disenfranchised in the land of their ancestors.
In my time, when I grew up, it was expected that if you're Hawaiian, you're going to fail. Taking the risk that this kind of project would entail, had that expectation in the whole time, and
So even the construction of the canoe, the very nerve of gall or of the dream, was,
what do you mean that you're going to recreate the spaceship of your ancestors and sail it to your homeland, to the homeland of your ancestors? And what do you mean that that's going to make you feel proud? This issue about being expected to fail is a real trap. It's a scary trap. I mean, if you believe it, you will. And we have to fight that all the time. Whatever's pushing the cloud is bringing it this way, and this wind must be underneath it. This is what we're feeling right. So this air mass is coming this way, and it's going underneath that as this cloud comes back. All that warm air comes up. It gets into the higher altitude, it cools, and the rain comes out, it's like friction, it pulls it back down, it hits the surface and it flows out. That's why when the squalls are coming through, the water was flat.
Nainoa realized that those waves, the swells, the sun, the moon, and the stars in the night sky were there as they always have been. On this training journey aboard the Hokulea, I'm finally going to see how the Wayfinders navigate the Pacific. It's amazing at last to be underway on the Hokulea. To be with sailors who can sense the presence of islands beyond the horizon simply by observing waves moving across the hull of the canoe. Every island has its own wave pattern that can be read like a fingerprint. Sailors who in the dark can feel as many as 32 different swells moving through the vessel. They follow the deep ocean currents with the ease with which an explorer on land would follow a river to the sea. The key is a navigator, sitting monk-like at the stern for days at a time, never really sleeping, ever sensitive to the changes in the weather, the currents, and the pulse of the swells. It's based on a system of dead reckoning. You only know where you are by remembering how you got there. Polynesians had no writing, and so every change of course and speed had to be remembered by the navigator. The navigator's task was made easier by two factors. With the exception of New Zealand, Hawaii, and Easter Island, no voyage through Polynesia is longer than 500 kilometers as a crow flies. On the ocean, one can see roughly 50 kilometers, which significantly fills in the spaces between the islands. What's more, the Polynesians were as much wayfinders as navigators. They didn't have to find a specific island. They had to reach an island chain. I find it extraordinary that 15 people can live on a deck 12 meters by 6 for 7 days and never have a squabble. There needs to be calm to listen to the wind. We're heading south on a training voyage, past Oahu, then across the straits of Molokai. It's deceptively calm, for storms always loom. But for now, we are taking our cues from the sea to plot a chart to Molokai in our minds. As night falls, the navigator becomes more alert. Clouds and waves warn of storms approaching. The setting sun was the last sure sign of west, so a detailed knowledge of the stars must guide us until morning.
There are about, I'd say maybe a couple hundred stars that we memorize. You really just need to know the real bright ones.
Polynesians use the stars as markers for islands. If they are far from home, the Hawaiians know their islands will always be under Arcturus. In their language, it's called Hokulea.
So the canoe becomes like the needle of the actual compass.
Yeah, that's right.
The helm of the vessel is square, allowing the navigator to align the canoe to the east and west with each dawn and sunset. He then lines up the mast with the star that he is following. Polynesians never thought of a voyage as a journey. They believed that the canoe stood still and that the islands came out of the sea to greet it.
When you have a black night where the ocean gets black, and that's when you can't navigate with your eyes anymore. Then you have to go someplace else. And that discipline is something that's very difficult for me to learn. It's almost as if I have to wash away that dependence on what I can see and what I can believe, and trust other senses. I mean, that's one level of this, what I say is knowing without knowing how you know. And that, I'm not very good at it. I'm still a virtual kindergartner. I mean, and I say that because I know the difference between myself and my teacher. Right. Where that deeper understanding of trusting other instincts is nurtured when he was a young child, and he was dependent on it for survival.
It's incredible to think that 30 years ago, before the Hokulea was built, Nainoa's teacher, Mau Pealuk, was the last of his kind. All the other navigators were dead.
The difference between Mau and I is that he comes from an unbroken ancestral teaching. He was taught by his grandfather, like his grandfather was taught by his. The navigator was crucial to the survival of that society, and they were chosen when they're young. Mao's grandfather picked Mao out of I don't know how many children at age 1, and he was trained at age 1 by putting them in different tide pools at different parts of the island, just to play in the water. And he was taught. He was sailing when he was 5.
You think strong wind in there? No.
No. Because we look underneath the clouds. We could clear it.
You can see through, yeah?
Yeah.
Where he took me to this place called Lanai Lookout, where we would study sunrises and sunsets every day. Because they're very important times of specific observation.
Now you see that's the sun, yeah? The lines come like this, yeah? That's for the wind?
For the wind.
He said, okay, go point to the star house of where Tahiti is. So that's elementary, so I pointed it out. I was confused by the question because it seemed so simple. And then he asked me a really extraordinary question. He said, do you see the island? And physically I can't see the island, but the nature of the question really, I recognized that saying no wasn't the right answer. And but I didn't know what was, so I kind of just stood there for a while and thought about what is he asking me, and finally I told him, Mao, I can see the island in my mind. And he said, good. He said, you keep that image in your mind. If you lose it, then you're going to be lost. Then he said, get in the car, take me home.
In time, Nainoa would sail some 10,000 kilometers from Hawaii to Easter Island, crossing the doldrums, to reach an island only 25 kilometers in width, a single degree on the compass. Had he missed, he would have faced the unknown, 3,000 kilometers of empty ocean all the way to Patagonia without food or water. That he made it reveals the genius of Polynesian navigation, the brilliance of mind that allowed a civilization to spread across an ocean.
All human beings face the same kind of social imperatives. We all have to have children, look after our children, look after our families, find a way to understand the mystery of life and death and so on. And so out of that we build societies, we build civilizations, we build order in a world and a universe that may not have anyone. We make sense out of sensation. And so by definition, Polynesia made its own universe.
There are untouched ruins here in the Scandin forests of the Marquesas. More than words, they tell the story of Polynesian civilization. Edmundo Edwards did his first archaeological survey here in the 1980s. Some of his sites are 2,000 years old, and he believes there are many more to be found. The original name of this place was Tehenua Teanata, the land of men. The first Europeans arrived here in 1595 and named the islands after a marquis in Spain. But the real impact of outsiders came in the wake of Captain Cook in 1774 with the permanent settlement of traders and missionaries.
So we have this sort of terrible coincidence of this new religious idea, this new religious ideology coming in with the missionaries with the overt and explicit goal of eradicating everything that lies before them. There is no interest in what lies before them. All before them is pagan, heathen, diabolical, to be destroyed. In fact, the very intensity with which it is seen as diabolical becomes a mirror onto your own righteousness. And that was a whole dialectic with the missionaries. So they just want to wipe it out.
This is Hatuatua, and that area is unexplored.
Totally unexplored.
Yeah, we were the first.
So what do you think the population was here?
Probably about 2,000-3,000 people lived here in the past.
And it looks like a couple of rivers or streams come into the valley?
There's two big streams that come down, then there's a little...
So you had fresh water all the time, you had the ocean and breadfruit, taro, sweet potatoes, everything you needed right here in the valley.
Everything. The midden that we are seeing now is a later midden. Oh, here you have this is it's a natural stone, but if it is in this context, it must have been used probably as a weight.
Fish weight or something?
Fish weight. Here you have another bone that is perforated for some reason. And here there's a piece of pearl shell that has been worked here on the edges. It could well be 1,000 years old. We don't know because this site precisely hasn't been excavated yet, but it can be.
Well, that's an amazing thing. If you think about it, I mean, here we are, oldest site in Polynesia, scarcely excavated, and you know we hardly even know what went on here.
Here we are sitting on the earliest settlement of Eastern Polynesia. This was settled probably from Samoa by a group of people that arrived in a voyaging canoe around the end of the first millennium before Christ, probably between 200 and 300 years before Christ. And this small group of people occupied this valley, probably other valleys also. We don't know if it was an expedition, if there were many canoes. We don't know how many trips they made back and forth to be able to transfer all their landscape and their plants and everything they needed here.
Whole civilization.
Whole civilization, their culture, everything.
You know, Edmundo, it's incredible. You walk through here and you've climbed all the way up from the beach, and the entire landscape has been transformed by human beings. Every single inch of this mountainside is covered, not just covered by remains of human habitation, but by monumental architecture. It's extraordinary. I've never been in a place where you walk across miles of landscape, and not only is the landscape completely covered by the remains of an ancient civilization, but so little of it has been studied or even surveyed by archaeology. Here we have these immense terraces, a piece of decorated rock. But why this petroglyph here, do you think? I mean, why, as opposed to any of the other stones in the immediate environment, why do you think this one was decorated?
Because this must have been a sacred place, but we don't know much about the petroglyphs because nobody ever, a missionary or anybody in all Polynesia, asked anything about petroglyphs. Not even in Hawaii or Easter Island or Marquesas. So we don't know why they were made or what they were used for.
It's incredible that you could come to a world and have your first impulse to transform it without even bothering to embrace it and understand anything about it. I mean, it'd be like me marching into your house in the suburbs of New York, and before I even say hello to you or introduce myself, I start painting your living room green. You know, the amazing thing is that the whole mountainous island is covered with vegetation, and it's so verdant you can just see how quickly the forest cover would just sweep over any site.
And it's covered everything. I mean, you cut down the vegetation here in a couple of months, it's completely covered again.
Families lived on these stone platforms called paipais.
Okay, this is the burial site that I told you about, that we haven't seen.
Edmundo's assistant, Alphonse, has just told us of a grave he has discovered in the corner of this paipai.
Alphonse, he just told me it's full of skeletons inside and skulls and other things.
But it's never been found before?
Look, you can see a skull over there.
It's never been found before?
No, he's the first guy to go in. We're the second to come and have a look here. Watch it there.
It's okay.
What do you see down there?
Oh wow, there's some big skulls. I mean, there's actually quite a few skulls.
As my light hits the scattered bones, I try to imagine who these people were.
One of them has clearly been busted on the top. I mean, I think a lot of people are buried here. If you look around, let me just... And there's a whole space that crawls back in here. And I bet, if you excavated here, you'd find all kinds of bodies. It's not just a single individual. I bet there's 50 people buried in here.
Crush any of the bones, but going deeper into there. It's amazing.
Well, quite a find.
Incredible find.
So the population could have been as high as 80,000?
80,000 at least, I believe. In this island. And all the Marquesas
Just
probably...
on this island?
Just on this island.
What about the entire archipelago?
Oh, probably over 300,000.
300,000? And it collapsed to as little as 2,000?
Yep.
What happened?
Diseases. Diseases, arrival of Europeans.
And how fast did it happen?
Oh, could have happened in one generation. Could have gone down to practically nothing. In 1863, when the smallpox epidemic arrived to the Marquesas, it wiped out about 85% of the population of all valleys in 1 month.
There was no way the ancient Marquesans could have been prepared for the pathogens that would arrive with the Europeans. In their language, they use the same word for both European sailor and venereal disease. The missionaries rationalized the horrendous death rate on the Marquesas by saying that it was God's just punishment of the heathen. They left no records describing what the culture had been like at contact. The French colonial administration in 1863 formally outlawed virtually every aspect of traditional Marquesan life. This merely codified what had been underway since first contact, the utter destruction of the people.
So that almost the way of the ancestors was, within a generation, it slipped from history into the realm of myth, and from myth into the very deepest recesses of memory from which it could not be retained.
The Marquesans had no choice but to accept the shattering of their world and to do their best to adapt to a new reality. What happened in the Marquesas was not dissimilar to what happened throughout Polynesia. The demographic collapse, together with European colonization, both devastated the traditional economy and brought an end to oceanic trade. The navigator had always been the cultural pivot. Navigation was what fundamentally defined the Polynesians. Suddenly, the wayfinder had no role. Which is precisely why the Hokulea today must sail. As Nainoa Thompson always says, it is by voyaging that modern Polynesia may rediscover the essence of what it is.
That's the sun or
Which one?
a little dot? It's like a little small little dot. The rain, the little dot.
Yeah. Rain.
The sun right there.
The sunrise.
Think for a moment what will be lost when this one old man passes away. Now multiply that by all of the other elders in each of the thousands of cultures that are now imperiled. Margaret Mead said it so well, what this is really all about. If we are not careful, we may wake up one day as from a dream and forget that there were ever any other possibilities for life other than our own.
Did he ever express any regrets or concerns about the fact that he was one of the last of the great navigators?
Yeah, I would say the 29 years that I've known him, he's always been concerned about the survival of his culture. He once said that if there's no navigators, there are no men in his culture. That's why we have to sail. That's why we have to build a school. That's why we need to create canoes for the people, and that's what we plan to do.
Ready? Set. Get ready up.
After 3 days and 300 kilometers at sea, the young wayfinders under Nainoa Thompson are sailing to Molokai on board the Hokulea. In 1976, the Hokulea sailed for the first time following the traditional route from Hawaii to Tahiti. When it arrived at Papeete, the crew was astonished to see waiting for them a jubilant crowd of over 16,000.
But something happened when they launched that canoe, and I'm not adequate to add it all up, but something very powerful happened, and it was as if there was not only the ability to have dreams, but all of a sudden there was a symbol that said you and demanded that you ought to be proud. And that was a whole new sensation. I grew up always, as subtle they may be, the signals that you're less than good as other Americans, and that, to be honest, there are a whole bunch of circumstances I think that allowed us to find our way, that allowed us to pull Tahiti out of the sea after 30 days on the ocean without instruments. One of those reasons is just a driving force of anger and rage about made to feel that you're second rate, and that the canoe's place in our lives was so powerful that we just couldn't fail.
Nainoa became the navigator of the Hokulea in 1978. He admits now that he had a lot to learn.
We knew so little that we didn't even know what it takes to be committed to voyaging. So we left on a voyage having no clear idea whether we're ready or not. And hindsight made enormous mistakes.
One of these ended in tragedy. They left Honolulu and sailed into the Straits of Molokai. Nainoa's best friend, Eddie Aikau, was on board, a world champion surfer, and at 31, already a legend in the Hawaiian community. They weren't very far from port when they were hit by a storm.
And when the canoe capsized on the journey, we were 20 plus miles outside of Lanai, gale force winds. Hopefully it turned over. We had a surfboard on the canoe, and he said he needed to go. And we were rescued the next midnight, and we never saw him again.
Eddie was a lifeguard. He grabbed his board and tried to paddle for help. The crew and the Coast Guard went looking for him, but his body was never found. With his death, old wounds were opened, and the family of the Hokulea began to fall apart. The Hokulea went from a symbol of hope to a symbol of failure.
His journey on his own, his passing was like lightning. You know, it came and just struck our community, broke it in half, and one half was saying, you know, voyaging ain't worth it. Take it out of the water, put that canoe into the Bishop Museum lawn and leave it there so nobody gets hurt. And the other half of the community was saying, well, then how many generations do we have to leave it on the lawn until our children can forget that tragedy and forget that in our generation's times we met the expectation and we did fail? I mean, that's what was at risk.
Nainoa's father, a man who was never brought up with his culture, was the one who realized what was at stake for Nainoa and his crew.
I remember him saying that day, the question you'll have to ask yourself is fundamentally about courage. Is the voyage worth the risk? If it is, then he said that extraordinary thing. If it is, let the lines go and be free. And he was saying that for me. Because my dad, I think, was saying, if I never went, I would never be free. And my good friends, Eddie once told me I gotta sail Hokulea because I need to go down and pull Tahiti out of the sea. And in doing so, I'll bring great honor to my ancestors, and in doing so, I'll bring pride to our children. And fundamentally, that's what it's about.
Nainoa, when he goes sailing, it's not like he's going sailing to rediscover a world that of an imagined paradise of a pre-European time. He's not naive and he's not foolish. He knows that can't be done.
What Nainoa is saying is, we did this. Like our ancestors, we sailed. And in sailing, we have given meaning not only to our own lives, but also to the lives of our children. The Hokulea skims the shore of Molokai, then turns for home. For me, this has been an extraordinary journey. I've sailed before, but sailing in the way of the Wayfinders with this young crew is a totally different experience. Nobody takes it for granted, and for everyone, including myself, it is a privilege just to step aboard the canoe.
And to me, the Hokulea exists on so many multiple layers of reality and metaphor. Of course it's a vessel, of course it's the recaptured memory of a distant age, of course it's a training ground for young people and new dreams and new hopes, but it also is literally seen to be the compass, the needle of the compass being all of the universe. And to me, that's sort of an interesting concept because it encourages us to shift perspective.
If we try to become like who we were 600 years ago, that's a reality that we would fail at seeking.
Well, that's no. It's like me becoming Irish 600 years ago.
Right.
It's preposterous. It's impossible.
Right. But in these stars and in these clouds, these oceans, those things didn't change. I mean, they were there when my ancestors were there. These canoes aren't those canoes, but they are in their wake.
I think one of the lessons to look back is to remember that for the Polynesians this may have seemed like a universe, and yet if you look at what happened to them within a single generation, you suddenly realize that nothing is stable, nothing is certain, and all of us have to be extraordinarily aware of the delicate balance that life represents. Modern industrial society as we know it, which seems to be spreading so quickly around the world, is only 300 years old. That shallow history should not suggest to any of us that we have all of the answers for all of the challenges that will confront us as a species in the ensuing millennia. On the contrary, the other voices of humanity are not expressions of something archaic. They are humanity's repertoire. They are the unique answers to the fundamental question, what does it mean to be alive?